Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with...
Hi, everybody. I'm Zoe, and I am the narrator for The Writer's Room, a 7th Sea podcast. And I'm also the creator for 10 Quills Dice.
Hello, I'm Michael. I am a GM and participant in the Bits Before Crits improvised adventure podcast, and was responsible for anything that happened during their 7th Sea campaign. And very excited to be back to talk more about Theah.
Excellent. Yes, and today we're going to talk about Nations of the Part 2, or Volume 2, which they focus on 4 nations that are on the east side of the Eisen, Starmatian Commonwealth, Usura, and Vordache. Let's talk about Eisen first. I wouldn't call it Transylvania. It's much, I think more Witcher than Transylvania. It's a very exciting area, probably, in my opinion, of all the 4 parts, almost as exciting as Vordache. You know, when it comes to all sorts of things. But again, I'm a bit of a horror fan, so that's not too surprising. So horror, in general, could be a tough thing to play. When it comes to this section, what are your thoughts about it in general? Have you played in this setting before?
Yes.
Michael, I'll give it to you first.
Very kind of you. Well, I also am a big horror fan, born loving like Call of Cthulhu and things like that. So yeah, Eisen, I think, depicts horror probably better than anywhere else in Theah. And having both ran some stuff there and being a player there, fear is definitely a thing that can be induced there, and it's also the best place to introduce even more so supernatural entities that Theah can offer and the 7th Sea book can offer. Because there's a whole chapter in this book and then the general book about monsters and what they do and how their abilities are different than what the players and what the villains can do, which I find fascinating. Because what more does a GM like more than a monster creation setup? And yeah, very much the vibe of like the sort of Witcher atmosphere. Everything is sort of muddy and gritty, and that's just the daytime. And it's unfortunately like where it was like ground zero, like history wise, for like the Great Wars, and unfortunately just has all the ramifications of all of that and all the dark magics and things like that happened there. That's what you get. You get a horrible wasteland by day, and then a horrible wasteland infested with monsters by night.
Yeah, Eisen unfortunately was the victim of in the book it's called the War of the Cross, and its real world analog would be the 30-year war. It was at war with itself. Both Objectionism and Vaticine were kind of like a holy war, just combating each other. And then Montaigne was like, oh, hey, I see that you're fighting yourselves. We're just going to take this land from you. And the Eiseners are like, excuse you, you're not involved in this. And then Castile was like, well, hey, if those heathens get in here and make that place unholy, there's no way we're letting that happen. So then Castile got involved. And right around the back half of and this war lasted actually 30 years, right around the back half of that war is when things started to go really weird, because you had all 3 magics of these nations. You had Castile, which was alchemy, so you had bombs, you had like potions that exploded, you had really crazy things, and then you had the Montaignes, who would just appear out of portals of blood and do terrible things and also bring people with them. It was really bad. And then Eisen, of course, has its own magic, and I'm not a big horror fan, and I'm also even less of a fan of like body horror. So that whole magic, like in the book, it says if you're not okay with these weird things, stop reading. I stopped reading, but I did dabble a little bit here and there with it in the second book, because the second book isn't about doing it to people, it's about doing it with monsters. And so that to me kind of translated a little bit better. So it's basically totally not necromancy. And it's just a bad time.
It's Hexenwerk, if I'm not.
Hexenwerk, which is in the German translation is the work of witches, hexa being witch. And so you had all three of these things happening at once, and Eisen, the land itself, just died. And all of the blood, all of the bad feelings, all of the just terribleness kind of baked itself into the land. And yeah, it hardened the people, but it also made it a breeding ground for all sorts of monsters. And that's not just including the natural ones. I mean the unnatural ones too. One of the things that Hexenwerk can do is called aberrants, which are, you know, we're just going to take this body part off of this person and put it on this person. And yeah, we're going to have some weird stuff happen.
This section has probably one of the bigger sections dealing with supernatural creatures. Have you used any of these? I know I haven't run them or seen them used in any of my games I played in. Have you both tried using them? What was the results of that?
So currently I am running a at-home game based entirely in Eisen. I took basically I described it to my players as take The Witcher, take Konami's Monster Hunter game, and take Castlevania and smash them all together. And that's the game that we're playing. So I based this less off of horror, like there's still an element there, but I'm not really big on the whole Cthulhu-esque thing. And more on monsters like werewolves and vampires and ghouls and ghasts and all sorts of these crazy creatures. So I've got not only, like, most of the time my players are fighting monsters, but they're also kind of investigating them too. Because the other thing is that, yeah, monsters are okay in Eisen. Well, okay in the barest sense.
Accepted.
Accepted. Yeah, that's more accepted. But the campaign that I'm running is that other monsters from other places are coming to Eisen. And so there's not only a war inside itself of like Eiseners versus the monsters, it's Eiseners versus the monsters versus other monsters. And it's just all monsters all the time. I'm playing Monster Mash and it's great.
One of my favorite villains I've created for both my campaigns came from Eisen. I think, yeah, but we talked like the amount of evil that came there, all it did was become a breeding ground for more evil. And I definitely can steer towards that mad scientist archetype from this place, and that's exactly what I created, was a mad scientist. So it was very fun to dabble in the necromancy, but not of that sort of aspect, and then from there create. I haven't gone full like madness Cthulhu-iness with my group because they already have done a Cthulhu campaign, and I didn't want to step on toes. And I also I don't know the comfort. I didn't want to test the comfort level of my players, so I think that's very important. Like the same thing in the book is like, if this is not your game, don't dabble in this. So I kept it very Hugh Jackman's Van Helsing, so same sort of like Victorian horror vampires, and mostly the undead was what I have mostly played with, and that's been fun to sort of mess with the players. And not only that, but then like the aspects of the Eisen, like there was an Eisen player who was definitely more into the macabre of stuff. So it was fun to sort of interact that with the other cultures where people might not be so into that, which was great role-playing opportunities. If you're going to play a character from Eisen, it's just like, that's it. And then the villain was of course just like neck deep in the gore. So it was just, Eisen is great if you love, like you said, I think that was a perfect union. The Witcher, Castlevania, and Monster Hunter. Like that's it in a nutshell.
Zoe, you mentioned about having a campaign based on this part of the world. What characters did your players make so they could fit in well into that setting?
So when I start a campaign, I tell my players up front, this is where we're going to be. This is what we're going to do. Build characters based off of that. And the whole thing is that there is a secret society, there's a secret society in Eisen called the Kreuzritter, which are basically your, I'd say, holy-esque, but not to the point where they're like elitists. They hunt and catalog and just deal with monsters. And so the Kreuzritter had sent out a call to all nations saying, hey, if you're an expert on your nation's monsters, we need your help. They're invading our land, they're taking over, they're ruining the balance, the already upset balance in Eisen. We can't fight on two fronts. And so my players created characters that were experts in their field. I have a Highland Marcher who is all about the water fae, and because Eisen is just a 98% swamp, that's really going to come in handy. I have a Usurin who decided that he wanted to be a demigod. He wanted to be the godson of Matushka and Shura. And I was like, that is the coolest thing ever. Absolutely. So he has this big giant book of monsters that he's been cataloging. He's like 5,000 years old. And he's like, oh, there's new monsters in Eisen. I need to be there. I also have a local, an Eisener who was in the War of the Cross, who is a monster hunter. He calls himself the Huntmaster, and he just has lived in Eisen his entire life, doing what it is these people do. And then, because Kitai hasn't really come out yet, it started to come out, and then while I was running the game, the PDF has been finished and finalized. He wanted to play someone from Kitai, someone from Fuso, which is totally not Japan, and he wanted to play a samurai. And I was like, ooh, we could bring Japanese folklore monsters into here, so let's do that. So I have these people who are special in their own way, coming to Eisen to help Eisen rid it of their nation's monsters.
And speaking of monsters, Michael, you mentioned that before just now that one of your villain NPCs was from here, from Eisen. Do you, for any game master that's trying to set something up like that, do you have any recommendations concerning using supernatural villains against players?
I think what I think is, especially for Eisen, and I think building up a villain in general, but for Eisen, I think the dread, I think, is great. The slow burn, and sort of like everyone loves like the jump scares or something like that, where just, a hand pops out of the ground and grabs the player's foot. Spooky. But when you use that after you've described a village that is empty, they find one dead body. You can kind of describe the smell of death. You can describe how disgusting everything is to touch, and just give that atmosphere. And then you sort of present the things level by level. And then should the villain choose to reveal themselves, give them that, I almost want to say, give him that like Tim Burton. I gave him a Tim Burton like Oogie Boogie presentation. Like it had some flair, but also with that side of, it is absolutely terrifying. This is the last person you want to run into. But man, do they make an entrance.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything about Eisen that any of you want to share before we move on to the next chapter?
I think to play off of Michael's first comment, fear plays a really big part in 7th Sea, and I mean capital F fear. I'm not talking about I'm scared of spiders. Oh no, it's a different kind of fear. It is that primal fear of, oh, I am a lowly prey item, and this is a very big scary predator. I need to either fight or I need to flee. And fear is based entirely off of flee, because you're facing something that you don't understand, that you don't know, and every fiber of your being is telling you to run. Because 7th Sea is based off of heroes, it's really sometimes difficult to overcome that. There are some things in, you know, advantages and some virtues even overcome fear, but Eisen is a really great place to play and really delve into that psychic area of fear. Again, obviously talk to your players if they're down for that. If you're down to run that, absolutely. But if they're not, maybe Eisen isn't the place for you.
When people think of 7th Sea, they think of pirates automatically. And when I started making characters, I originally just went to the Pirates of the Caribbean as an inspiration right there and then. So to see Eisen as an option later on was kind of cool, because that's when I started really getting into the Castlevania series on Netflix.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, oh great, we could do something like that in 7th Sea. So it's good that there's something like this exists. The one chapter I had the most difficulty with is the Starmatian Commonwealth. It's a great chapter, though. There's a lot of information, good lore, good history. But I think out of all the 3 chapters, this one I had trouble grasping on a, I don't know if mythological level is the right word to say. So let me ask you both, have you played or used anything from this chapter or this part of the world?
I have 2 players that specifically come from Sarmatia, and they both have the lovely, wonderful sorcery that comes from Sarmatia. And I needed to really look and delve into the nation. Now, it's based off of totally not Poland and totally not Czechoslovakia. And so, in a nutshell, it had a ruling and, you know, monarchy and things like that. And if you were noble, you were allowed to vote. And so they sent all their nobles out, and it was this big thing. And finally, the old king said, you know what? I don't like how this is going. Everybody is a noble now. And it was decreed that every single person in the Summation Commonwealth was a noble. And so now it's kind of like, oh, that's great. Everybody has the same equal rights. But also, if we're trying to make a decision in court, you know, you've got the lowly farmer who's just here because he's a noble now, and then you've got a bunch of nobles. So a lot of things don't get done in the expediency that they used to. And you also have the Devi, the devils, which is the magic of Starmation Commonwealth. There is a place that I believe it's called the Crossroads, where you can meet a devil and make a deal with him or her or them or whatever. And they then kind of follow you around. And you don't want them to come to fruition, because then they gain a physical body and then they can do absolute terrible things. This is the only sorcery other than Hexenwork that I know of that actively grants corruption when using big magic, because the big magic is world breaking. It is absolutely broken. I enjoy Summation Commonwealth. I have yet to actually adventure in there, but it's really interesting to me to know that everybody has a say. The kind of political standpoint is a little on edge, but I feel, at least from my perspective, not as much as the other nations. Like, they kind of have their thing, but they're working it out. They don't really need heroes to come in and do it, but if, you know, by all means, if that's the kind of game you want to play, then absolutely. But from my perspective, they got it going on.
Yeah, it does seem like that their government's much more stable compared to some of the other nations. If anything, if there's anything that conflict in their society, is the religion side of things. You have 2 main areas in the Commonwealth, where one is pagan and one is the Catholic version of that religion. Yes. And so that's interesting. I've been trying a few times to imagine what it would be like to run a game with that, to make it really interesting without falling into like negative tropes. What are your thoughts about that?
When I think of the Sarmatian Commonwealth, I think that that's similar to Montaigne, but for a completely different reason, is a great place for social characters and political intrigue and subterfuge sort of games to happen, where that's where you're going to try to root out whoever's corrupt in the political game and try to get them out in that sort of way. There's a lot of battles of words that could happen there, or if for whatever reason, when I think of like the chaos that could ensue there, I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with Parks and Rec. I just think of like the town hall meetings where like everybody talks, including the one guy who says something completely irrelevant to the problem, but just makes it worse.
Yes.
Like that's what I think of. And I'm like, it's great, but it's also got its own chaos. And yeah, that's kind of where I go off of, is thinking that that's more the game you can play there. And then obviously, as Zoe said, the devil work happening there is so intriguing. I too have a player who has that, and I made a terrible mistake with his character creation. When I'm not sure how you've done it, Zoe, but when a Sarmatian character picks to have a devil, normally it's the GM's job to play that devil. I was very green when I let him do this, but I let this player also voice his devil and sort of follow within the parameters of what, I mean, I could pull some strings to make certain things happen, but then he ended up creating one of the most beloved, but also, and when I say beloved, I mean iconic, but also the most obnoxious character that no one else could see or hear for the entire campaign.
We love that, honestly. I think that's great.
It was a choice that I both partially regret, but also I'm partially happy I let happen. Because
I let them describe what they look like, because again, they don't have full physical bodies. So you only see, for one of my players, is you only see these elongated hands with like extra jointed fingers that come and sit on the shoulder whenever they're trying to talk and say a deal. And then I voice them, and it's usually something like light and airy and wispy and seductive, or absolutely grating, like you do not want to hear this thing talk to you, because only the Losja can hear him. No one else can.
And of course the listeners and the players.
Yeah, the listeners and the players, obviously. Whew.
Oh no. His was 3 inches tall. Just a very small, if you are familiar with The Year Without a Santa Claus original movie.
Yes.
It looks like Mr. White Christmas, the snow miser.
Oh my God.
3-inch snow miser.
Yes.
Oh, that's funny. Is there anything else about the Sarmatian Commonwealth before we move on that you want to share?
The Sarmatian Commonwealth also has one of my other players in one of the other live games that I play. I'm just starting to dabble into this. Is they have a Hussar player, so they have mounted cavalry, and they're very good at what they do. And I think that's so neat. They have a whole dueling style based off of it. It is rad. If you want to work with horses, be from the Sarmatian Commonwealth.
Having actually visited the Czech Republic years ago, and then like reading into this, like the winged hussars, like that sort of military unit, like the armor designed like literally from the history, like just like the wings that are part of the armor is just magnanimous to behold. And I think just like I just wanted to tackle on like just getting the idea of that, like
it's so cool.
Cavalry is so cool. And just my favorite thing about Sarmatian, other than the devils, is their relationship to the other nations, where the other nations sort of look at them, and some of them are like, "Yeah, good for you," and then other ones like Montaigne are like, "You let the poor people decide things? That's very stupid." It's like it's great to see that sort of clash of culture on a political side when you introduce these characters into other realms and such. So that was something I wanted to tack on there. I think is cool.
Chapter 3, Usara, very inspired by Russia. So seeing the mythological side of it, I think is really intriguing and kind of like opens doors in my mind for interesting adventures. Unfortunately, I have not played in this section yet. Have you both experienced this part of the world yet?
Yes, we have. I have a player who, like I said, in my Eisen game, he is the godson of the two powers at play in Usura, and that is Matushka, which is totally not Baba Yaga, and Churro, I believe. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Churro?
I think so.
Yeah, that's totally not Chernobog. And those are two big, Slavic, baked in powers of the real world. And they're also gigantic players in Usura, to the point where once a year, everyone in Usura will step outside, prick their finger, and drop blood onto the snow so that Usura is protected and so that they are protected, which also means, which is funny that you bring that up about how Napoleon and Hitler could not invade Russia. No one has successfully invaded Usura because the land itself is violent against invaders. There was, I believe, one of the major generals during the war, I think it was either during the 30-Year War or slightly afterwards, they were like, we're gonna invade Usura. They made it like a mile in, and then a freak snowstorm just wiped them all out.
It's so funny that it's like that, because then when you read about the people there, a lot of them, some of the most hospitable characters can come from Usura because they are trained to welcome guests and take care of them. Like, being a bad host or being a bad guest is worse, in a lot of cases worse than like a lot of other crimes you could commit.
Yeah.
Like, the rule of hospitality is such a huge role there, which is why like the land could be so, just like an Asuran can be unforgiving if you're a bad guest or a bad host, but the land is very unforgiving.
Yeah.
And one of my players also took a big choice here. Stephanie, who was here for part one, her character is an Usuran doctor who is an adopted daughter of a character from mythology. There's Koshek, who's definitely not Koshek the Deathless.
Yes.
Who in this world is essentially a lich in a lot of ways. And just messed with that sort of folklore and folktale where literally like, it's like finding a lich's phylactery. Like, it's like his soul is within an egg, in a chicken, in a chest, in a duck, like all these things. And like, it was a very fun, like fanciful quest sort of thing for her character, in addition to helping the group with things. Like, the folklore there is so powerful, just like Matushka and Churro. Like, and it's just a part of their daily lives. Like, there's just part of it. And it's like what you said in the beginning, Manny, like the things about Usura, like, it just works. You don't question it. It just works.
Just works.
You don't poke the giant snow bear.
Yeah, don't do that.
Say hello. You have a nice house. Thank you for letting me stay here, and go on your way.
What are your thoughts about the relationship in this part of the world with I'm saying this right, Marushka and Tura, exactly? Because it's very interesting. Like Tura's touch, for example, this almost like the other side of the coin of their belief system here. Have you looked into that for your stories or for your characters?
I have looked into that extensively because I have someone who's playing the godson. And so it's you've got Matushka, and she's all about teaching lessons. And if you are, let's say, not a good neighbor, or use your powers for ill-gotten gains or things like that, she will teach you a lesson, and you need to learn from that. So basically, you can't use your magic until this certain criteria is met. So if you lie to someone, for example, you can't use your magic unless you've only told nothing but the truth for a month, to make up for that. Whereas Chura is like, listen, you could kind of just do whatever it is that you want, as long as you spread my word. Just go out there and tell everybody that Matushka is bad and I'm good, okay? And so they go out there and do their thing. And so the lore is that they were once a couple, an item, you know, grandmother and grandfather, and then just over time separated into, you know, her side and his side. And so you can worship one or the other, but you can't worship both. Except I have a player that's like, nah, I'm gonna make grandma and grandpa happy again, and they're gonna get together and they're gonna do the thing.
I get 2 Christmases.
Two Christmases. I only wish I delved more into the political side. A lot of my players like to play high fantasy, high magic, high adventure. And so I don't really get to do a lot of intrigue or subterfuge or anything like that, or political things. I think the political side of Asura is fascinating. I've always kind of loved that whole thing. Like you said, it just works. We don't know how it works. It just does. And like Starmation Commonwealth, I think they have it handled, and they honestly don't want anybody interfering in their own affairs.
And nobody wants to.
And honestly, nobody wants to. Like, oh, you know what? We'll just leave it there. But I think given the right kind of game style, I think it would be extremely fascinating to delve into the kind of political aspect of Asura.
I played a game with a friend of mine who played an Asuran who had the touch of Matryoshka and was literally like, well, why don't we just pretend we're doing something else? And the game master was like, so you want to lie? Is that what you're telling me you want to do? And him, without thinking, was like, yeah. And then suddenly he had a whole little scene where this old woman with a mortar pestle and this thing comes by and reminds him that if he does this, he can't use his powers anymore. And it was very fun. It reminds me very much of, if you play Dungeons and Dragons, kind of that relationship like that a warlock or a cleric has with their deity, where it's like you can only use your magic if you follow these rules, and you can only do this if you follow which I think is just me being a sucker for great role play opportunities for myself and players. I think is great with Asura.
Mm-hmm. I take big inspiration from like Aesop's fables whenever I'm thinking about magic from Asura. Every one of them has a lesson.
Oh yeah.
So last but not least, chapter 4, Bodace. Pretty much very inspired by Italy. My first thought in this chapter was I was thinking about Assassin's Creed 2 or Assassin's Creed Brotherhood.
I both love and hate Bodace.
It's the only way to look at it.
It's really the only way
really
to look
is.
at it. Bodace is totally not Italy, and it is run by 7 merchant princes, and all of them have their own province and their own way of doing things, and that's just how they run. They are the only nation that declines using the Gilder, which is the world, you know, kind of what Vesta Manavinyar did. We talked about it in Nations 1, if you haven't.
The fantasy euro.
Yes, the fantasy euro, totally not euro. They are the only ones that still use their own currency, because they're all merchant princes, and they're like, no, I'm not going to conform to you. How dare you? I find it fascinating that it hasn't fallen apart. Every single merchant prince plays the big game, and that's what I think about when I think Bodace, the game. Everybody's in it to win it. They're playing for the long run. They're playing for keeps. And it's just this great like chess match, like 4-tier chess match that all the merchant princes are playing. And you have my favorite merchant prince, Mondavi, who is like, yeah, I don't really care about playing the game. I'm just going to go be a terrible person and hunt people for a living. he's literally like, I actually, in Third Floor Wars' channel, I am currently running a live 7C game based in the Mondavi province around Prince Mondavi. And I took the most dangerous game. I don't know if you're familiar with Rudyard Kipling's little thing. And I was like, I'm going to take that and I'm going to turn it into a 7C adventure. Here we go.
I was wondering who you were going to say your favorite merchant prince was.
Yes. My favorite merchant prince is Mondavi. My second favorite is Villanova, because all of Vodacce tells stories to their children. Like, if you're not good, Villanova will get you. He's the boogeyman among the merchant princes.
When I think of them, I think also just like, I think of like The Godfather and the crime families. Like, this is the long game. Like, it is like that. Like, it's all about you play the game, and the only times that like real bloodshed actually like out of control happens is when someone tries to mess with the system. Like, it's fine if you kill somebody, but if that somebody was in charge of this deal, then you're not only are you dead, but your family's dead, your friends are dead, and anyone who heard of your name is dead. No questions asked. See you. Goodbye. Thank you for coming in. And it's great how it works. And the princes make great hooks for your players to be great villains depending on what they're doing. My favorite prince is Caligari.
Ooh.
The creepy old man who collects the cursed objects.
Yes.
But when they say he looked old 10 years ago.
How do you both feel about the dueling styles in this part of the world? The fact that that maybe not as honorable as other styles are presented.
No, they are the underhanded of dueling styles, and honestly, I haven't really delved too much into it. I have one, like, he's a villain, but he's not the main villain, so he doesn't get a lot of screen time in my game. Yeah, he's a little bit bigger than a goon.
Okay,
he's a backstory villain.
Okay.
So he's one of the people that shows up every once in a while just to really mess with that character. And he has one of the dueling styles, and it is just nasty.
It's dirty.
It's so dirty. I hate it. I hate it and love it at the same time.
The fact that it's all about specifically being dominant with your left hand is also like such a historically like taboo thing, where like even in like today modern sports like baseball, you're terrified to play against a left-handed batter or a left-handed pitcher. In fencing, a left-handed sword fighter is absolute nightmare.
A nightmare.
So when you introduce a character that fights not only in the Vodacce dirty style, but is literally trained to fight the one way that upsets anyone else that's trained to duel in other dueling schools, it just already makes an impact. And yeah, I also have a small villain that fights that style, and what's great is you can also have heroes come from Vodacce and introduce that sort of lifestyle, like your quintessential roguish character or something like that, where they're heroic, but perhaps they bend the rules a little bit here and there. Perhaps they're like, we could try to talk it out, or I could knock this guy out in an alley and take the key back that we needed. And by the way, I already did it, so I'm not asking permission. I'm asking for
forgiveness, and also, can we go?
Yeah. Also, we should probably
go. We need to go.
Sorry, go ahead.
One of the things that isn't talked about is Vodacce is great in the sense that it's got its own, kind of world. However, the one thing it's not great with is its women. Yeah, we're going to talk about that for a little bit, because the sorcery for Vodacce is strictly women, and it's fate. They can basically, they're called Sorte Strega, or fate witches. They can read your arcana, basically know what makes you a hero and what your weakness is. And they can also physically pull your fate strands and like yank you around. And I kind of homebrewed it a little bit because the books are glorious and they're vague in that way. I've homebrewed it that my fate witches, if you're running at my table, you can kind of mess with it a little bit more. You can, instead of pulling, you can like weave it so that something happens that isn't necessarily supposed to happen. But with that, of course, you are messing with fate. So some things down the line will come to get you.
The cost is so good.
The cost is very high, but the magic is so potent.
Yes. One of my players is a Strega. one of my main players plays a Strega. And yeah, the lore behind that is so great, and the choices that your players can do. I also kind of homebrew that a little bit with like what they want to do, and be like, okay, we can make that be something you can utilize. And yeah, the costs are great, where it's either you're paying in blood, where you're actively wounding yourself, or you're giving yourself misfortune, which limits your choices and bad things can just happen to you, or more importantly, to other characters on them. And yeah, just the history of how the Stregas are born and how they're treated in the Vodacce society is such a problem.
It's a very big problem. They are
anyone that's not Vodacce, a businessman.
Yeah. So you, when you're a Strega, you get a mark. It's like a birthmark that everybody knows, like, oh, you're kissed by fate. And basically from then on, you belong to your family. You do not have your own agency. You're not taught how to read, not taught how to write. You are basically in Fate Witch school until I think like 16 or 17, maybe even younger, maybe 14. And then you're married off to some noble or some, hopefully, a merchant prince to up your family stature. And then you belong to your husband. That's it. That's the life of a Fate Witch. It's terrible. It's why, it's why the secret society is based entirely off of smuggling Fate Witches out of Vodacce.
That was the backstory that was chosen. My player chose that she was rescued because she's a child, so she's like very untethered. So it's like rescued from Sophia's daughters. That's what I believe. Yes, they're all about righting that wrong. But I also love the other side of that is that if there are women that do not have that touch, they sometimes can develop a career as a courtesan, where they become very skilled in all the social aspects, very well read, very smart. The people that the Vodacce men really want to hang out with, because they are very skilled in all these sort of social talents. But on the other side of that is they clearly cannot hold property and things like that. And also they have to try to disguise their faces, because if a Strega can recognize who that is, or a vengeful wife can figure out who that courtesan is, that's trouble.
Yeah.
And as this 7th is all about mostly piracy and things like that. One of my favorite things is that sometimes pirates want to be careful going after a Vodacce ship, because you never know if the captain or someone on that ship brought their Fate Witch with them, and they'll see him coming. Yeah. And that was a great reveal later, being like, what do you mean my surprise failed? Because there's a Fate Witch on the ship that saw you coming a mile away.
It just occurred to me, I don't think any of myself or any of the players I played with have ever played Vodacce characters. They always, if they're introduced, they're usually villains. I've realized. Do you come across that pattern as well, or?
More often than not, yeah. A lot of, I actually had to convince one of my players that, Vodacce isn't the land of villains. There are heroes that can come out of Vodacce. In fact, one of the merchant princes is pretending to be, the villain. It's, I can see a lot of villainy coming out of Vodacce, because it is underhanded. It is, playing the long game. You better watch out. Don't insult that man. His wife might pull your strings in the middle of the night, and you'll never be seen again. But there's a lot of good. I know I'm contributing it to the Musketeers, but I feel like there's a lot of that, like the vigilante kind of heroism comes from Vodacce, like running across rooftops and like doing things at night, and all sorts of cool things can happen. Very much Assassin's Creed, actually, Manny, to pick up on what you're saying. Like, there's definitely a lot of fun things to do as a hero from Vodacce.
The integrity that a character from Vodacce has is so important to them. Like, it's similar to, I tie the similarities to Castile, where it's a very strong ties to your reputation, your family, and how you represent yourself and your family on that stage. Where, like, if you're gonna challenge someone, if you're gonna boast about how great you are, you better back it up, because that is worse than murdering somebody. If you being disowned from your family or something is worse than anything. So I think that that's a great like building spot for players to build a hero, where it's like they have to be larger than life when they go and do something. They have to.
And any last words or thoughts about this section?
I really enjoy the dichotomy between, the men kind of rule Vodacce, but the women also do in their own way, because the men won't mess with Fate Witches. They actually find them, like if a Merchant Prince and a Fate Witch, not his wife, were walking down the street and someone pickpocketed the Merchant Prince, it'd be like, oh, all right, cool. Well, I'll just find his family and kill him later. But if somebody slights the Fate Witch, everybody in the vicinity, including that Merchant Prince, is going to be like, kill that man now, right now. Do not mess with Fate Witches. You just don't, because it bodes ill for everyone, and and everybody knows that in the back of their heads. So it's like, yeah, the women are policed basically their entire lives, but they're also revered. And the other thing too that I find really interesting mechanics wise with Vodacce and Fate Witches is that if you want to, you can use a tarot deck to play as a Fate Witch. You can actually like use it in mechanics, and there is a physical tarot deck that you can buy that's 7C specific. And in my I also own it, and in my Third Floor Wars game, which is running tomorrow on YouTube, my Fate Witch uses the tarot deck, and it's fascinating. It's a lot of fun, actually. If you can mess with the mechanics and like make cool things happen, that's a way to do it, and I love it.
So so go ahead.
I would say, like, one thing I'll pull away from this is, as we're ending with, like, yes, I guess it is very easy to try to pull villains from Vodacce, but I definitely would love to challenge players and challenge GMs to find more heroic aspects of Vodacce, because they're definitely there and they're definitely worth diving into. Because, yeah, being a part of Sophia's Daughters to revolutionize the way the Strega are treated is a great way to go. The Fate Witches are one of the most fascinating classes. Like, even like other nations' sorcery aspects, like people from Avalon, people from Usur, they are terrified of Fate Witches, as well as like every like little chapter is like, you don't mess with the Fate Witches, don't mess with them, respect them, let them do their thing, just stay away from them. So yeah, I challenge people to find heroism in Vodacce.
Nations of Theah Volume 2. Why would you pick up this book?
I picked up this book specifically for Eisen, because when I first started playing, someone described to me, his name is Sam Pearson, he's in my podcast, he helps me with the mechanics. He described to me everything in its analog European version. And so as he got to Totally Not Germany, I was like, I want to be from there. I don't care what's happening. I want to be from there, because I grew up over there. And my dad was in the military, so we were stationed there for a long time. And so seeing the fantasy version of Germany, it actually translated to a lot of real Germany, where they still believe in folklore, like don't go out at night. That's still a thing in a lot of the smaller villages in Germany. They still won't do that. They'll still hang like iron nails on their door. They'll still be very polite to strangers. And it was fascinating to me. I picked it up specifically to read more about Eisen. And then I found Asura, and I fell in love with Asura, and then Vodacce. And then I'm still dabbling on Summation Commonwealth. I'll get there, I promise. But it's a fascinating book if you really want to delve more into the less savory places. And I mean that by, Eisen is war-torn, Vodacce is the land of villainy, Starmatian Commonwealth has devils, and Usura is run by these two, sorceress folklore beings on top of their own government. But yeah, if you want to delve more into that, absolutely pick up this book.
If you are a fan of, basically fantasy Eastern Europe is what I would say this concocts is fit. Like, yeah, if you are as a GM want to dive more into Eisen or something like that, or you are a fan of like Eastern European folklore and to explore how that's inspires what's in 7th Sea, I definitely recommend the book, because then it dives further into not just the folklore, it dives into the culture, more so into the dueling styles if people want to get more into that, and more into the sorceries and what players can do to customize their characters even further. If they've got the player's handbook and they're really inspired by how the Dievas work, and want to look even more so into like, what can I really do to really color my character's story and color how they affect the story that they're going to tell, get this book. It's just savory, like more for your palate.
For me, I'm glad I picked up this book because this is going to sound strange. It feels like less 7th Sea than the first book, meaning that the first book I felt like was piracy and adventure and romance, and this one it feels like if you want to try something a little bit different, are you more into horror or into like roguish society, or maybe just politics or something like Russia, you know. It's just very different things. All these sections are so different from each other, and they're all given equal amount of attention. Looks like each section is divided almost evenly, almost like 50 pages each of information, and you get NPCs, you get all sorts of places and cities and locations, tons of culture, and there's adventure hooks. And again, if you're into like options, there's like new backgrounds, advantages, and definitely magic. A lot of new magic options. So I would definitely recommend getting this book. Any last words before we wrap up?
Eisen's great. I don't know. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah, jealous and shamelessly will say that Eisen's probably one of my favorite places in all of the 7 books, and it's just
so drenched in. It's great. Just go get it. Just go read the book.
Well, everyone, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and be safe out there. Have a good day.